If you've ever poured your soul into something, only to have someone else sign their name at the bottom, then you need to hear this. Hey, boast your way, and did it. If you've ever been called difficult for asking for what you were promised, or too emotional for having a perfectly logical reaction to being betrayed, stick around. It helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. Hey, boys, my name is Isla, and this isn't a story about revenge. Hey, boys, my name is Isla, and this isn't a story about revenge. Shiwe Biang's Endif and a face Ibadiv and Diad. It was never about revenge. It was about correcting a history that had been deliberately corrupted, and it started as so many endings do, with a death. My Aunt Laurel was the quietest person I ever knew. A librarian by trade, a lover of solitude by nature. She lived in a small, tidy house that always smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea. When she passed, the world barely registered it. A few polite notices, a small service. To me, however, it was like a foundational column in the architecture of my life had been silently pulverized. She was my anchor, the one who taught me to see the world not as a series of chaotic events, but as a system, a set of rules that once understood could be navigated, or if necessary, rewritten. Her will was as simple and unassuming as she was. The house went to a historical society, her modest savings to a cat shelter, and to me, her only niece, she left what the lawyer dryly described as her personal effects. This turned out to be a single, staggering bequest, her vinyl record collection. It was massive, hundreds, maybe 1,000 LPs, stacked in heavy wooden crates in her dusty, finished basement, and they were, to my ears, uniformly awful. Obscure 70s folk singers with names like Thistle and Moonflower, album covers featuring doe-eyed women staring wistfully into sun-drenched fields. It felt like a posthumous prank. I was a child of clean digital lines, of algorithms and code. This was analog chaos, a mountain of scratchy, sentimental noise. My boss, Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Axiom Digital, the firm where I was the lead systems architect, found it particularly hilarious. I'd made the mistake of mentioning my strange inheritance during a team meeting, hoping for a moment of human connection. Marcus, a man who saw connection as a transactional opportunity, just smirked. He said, "You should host a fondue party, Isla, very retro." His new protege, a 20-something marketing hire named Tiffany, whose primary qualification was being the daughter of a board member, giggled on cue. The rest of the team, the brilliant engineers I'd mentored and fought for, just stared at their monitors. They knew better. They knew Marcus. The plan was simple: donate the lot. I called a local charity, arranged a pickup, and spent a miserable Saturday hauling the heavy crates out of the basement and into my garage. It was a workout, a final, frustrating act of service to a woman I adored, but in this one instance could not understand. As I lugged the last crate, one record slid from its sleeve and clattered onto the concrete floor. It was by a singer I'd never heard of, Silas Blackwood, the album titled Echoes in the Grooves. The cover was just a stark black and white photo of a crow on a wire, more interesting than the folk singers at least. Out of some final, foolish flicker of sentimentality, I decided to play it. I'd inherited Laurel's old turntable too, a heavy wood-paneled beast with a plexiglass cover. I set it up, cleaned the record as best I could, and dropped the needle. Nothing, just a repetitive, jarring thump thump thump, as the needle caught on a deep, ugly scratch that ran in a jagged, unnatural line across the entire first track. I sighed, frustrated. Of course, the one record that looked interesting was the one that was ruined. I was about to pack it away with the others when I stopped. The scratch wasn't jagged, it was precise. Too precise. It didn't look like an accident. It looked like it had been carved. I took it to my desk, under the bright glare of my lamp, and pulled out a magnifying glass I used for examining circuit boards. My heart began to beat a little faster. The scratch wasn't a scratch. It was a line of text, infinitesimally small, etched into the vinyl, spiraling inwards. It was micro-etching, military-grade stuff. My hands started to shake as I slowly deciphered the words, my lips moving silently. It was a single cryptic sentence: "The quietest bird sings the truest song. Grand Central, Locker C731. The key is in the chassis. My blood ran cold. The quietest bird. It was a phrase Laurel had used. When I was a kid, struggling with a complex piece of code or a logic puzzle, frustrated and loud, she'd put a hand on my shoulder and say that. Calm down, Isla. Shouting doesn't solve the puzzle. The quietest bird sings the truest song. It meant the answer was in the calm, quiet, overlooked details. I turned and looked at the turntable. The key is in the chassis. With a screwdriver from my toolkit, I pried off the bottom panel of the heavy record player. Taped to the inside of the metal housing was a small, old-fashioned brass key, heavy and ornate, with a number stamped on its head, C731. My aunt wasn't just a quiet librarian. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was something else entirely. This was a tradecraft, a dead drop. This was the secret life of a woman I thought I knew, a life hidden in plain sight, disguised as cheesy folk music and dusty hobbies. And I was standing in my garage, on the precipice of a secret she had carried for decades. A secret that, I would soon learn, was not just hers, but was deeply, inextricably tangled with the very place I worked, with the man who mocked me, and with a terrible injustice that had been buried for 20 years. That was the moment the ground gave way. It was the moment my small, predictable life ended, and Laurel's true story, and my own began. It began not with a bang, but with the silent, terrifying discovery of a key taped to the bottom of a turntable. The drive into Manhattan felt unreal. The key was heavy in my pocket, a solid, tangible piece of a life I couldn't comprehend. Grand Central Station. It had to be a mistake, a bizarre coincidence. Aunt Laurel's world was books and cardigans, not spy movie cliches and bustling train terminals. I felt a growing sense of dread, a cold pit in my stomach that had nothing to do with the morning's betrayal at work, and everything to do with the ghost of my quiet, unassuming aunt. The woman who taught me BASIC on her old Commodore 64, who explained Boolean logic using cookie jars, was suddenly a stranger. The foundation of my world was sand, and the tide was coming in. I found the locker bank in a less trafficked corridor, smelling faintly of disinfectant and diesel. C731 was near the bottom, its gray metal door scarred with age. My hand trembled as I slid the brass key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click, a sound that sealed the past and opened a future I wasn't ready for. I pulled the door open. Inside was a single dusty leather satchel. It was heavy. I didn't open it there. I couldn't. I carried it back to my car like a bomb, placed it on the passenger seat, and drove home in a state of suspended animation, my mind a blank hum of static. Back in my apartment, the city lights beginning to blur through the window, I finally unbuckled the satchel. The leather was stiff and cool. Inside wasn't money or microfilm. It was a thick, bound ledger book, and a small, heavy metal object wrapped in oilcloth. I unwrapped the object first. It was an old hard drive, a clunky 3.5-inch IDE model from the late 90s, the kind that made a satisfying whirring sound when it spun up. An antique, a digital fossil. The ledger was filled with my aunt's handwriting. It was a journal, but it wasn't personal. It was a work log, meticulous and dated, full of technical jargon, server migration paths, and lines of code. The entries began in 1998 and abruptly stopped in the fall of 2002. The name of the project she was working on was Project Alexandria. The client, Axiom Digital. My company. I felt a wave of dizziness. Aunt Laurel had worked at Axiom. She'd never told me. She was one of the founding architects of the very systems I now managed. She was the one who built the foundation. The cheesy folk records suddenly made a horrible, perfect sense. They weren't a random collection. They were a catalog, an index. Each album, each artist, was a mnemonic device, a key to a piece of a larger puzzle. Only she, and now, maybe, I could understand. I spent the rest of the night cross-referencing the ledger with the record collection I'd been so ready to throw away. Thistle wasn't a singer. It was the code name for a primary database server. Moonflower was a security protocol, and Silas Blackwood, the singer of Echoes and the Grooves, the broken record. According to her ledger, Silas Blackwood was the code name for a person, a programmer. His name was Alexei Volkov. The last entry next to his name, dated October 12, 2002, read, "They burned him." Marcus lit the match. It wasn't his fault. The flaw was in the core. My core. I have the proof. They pushed me out before I could use it. The echo is in the groove. The echo is in the groove. The proof. It was on the hard drive. My blood turned to ice. Marcus, my boss, the glib, condescending CEO, had been there back then. I remembered his corporate bio now. He'd started as a junior project manager in the late 90s, a fast riser. He lit the match. I needed to see what was on that drive. The problem was, I didn't own a computer with an IDE port. It was like trying to play a wax cylinder on a smartphone. But I knew who did. I knew the only person on Earth who loved obsolete technology more than he loved breathing. His name was Ben, and he ran a dusty computer repair shop in a forgotten strip mall, a place called the Silicon Altar. Ben was a digital necromancer. He could resurrect dead data, coax life from fossilized motherboards. He was also a friend, one of the few I had outside of work. I trusted him. I walked into his shop the next day, the hard drive in my bag, my heart hammering against my ribs. The shop smelled of ozone and solder. Ben was hunched over a tangle of wires, a soldering iron in his hand, looking like a mad scientist. He looked up, his glasses perched on his nose. "Isla, to what do I owe the honor? Did you finally kill your laptop? I need you to do something for me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And you can't ask any questions." His eyes narrowed, intrigued. He loved a good mystery. I placed the old hard drive on his workbench. "I need to know what's on this. Can you make a perfect one-to-one image of it?" He picked it up, weighing it in his hand. An old Maxter, a classic. "Where did you dig this up?" I just stared at him. "Right," he said, nodding slowly. "No questions. Come back tomorrow." That night was the longest of my life. I sat in my silent apartment, surrounded by the vinyl records that were no longer just records. They were ghosts. They were a library of secrets. I thought about all the years I'd spent at Axiom. I'd joined straight out of college, drawn by the elegance of its core architecture. It felt familiar, intuitive. Now I knew why. I was walking through a house my own aunt had built. I thought about the little injustices, the paper cuts of 1,000 corporate moments. Marcus, presenting my work as his own in a board meeting. Marcus, explaining my own system back to me, but incorrectly. Marcus, patting my shoulder and calling me a workhorse, a rock star, any name that implied labor without intellect, strength without vision. I had tolerated it. I had stayed. I had told myself it was about the work. It was about protecting the integrity of the system. I see now, in the unforgiving light of hindsight, that this was a lie I told myself. I was staying out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, not to the company, but to the ghost of its architect. I was tending my aunt's garden, while the man who had burned it down stood by and watched, taking credit for the blooms. I remembered one time, about 5 years ago, we were facing a catastrophic server failure, a cascading collapse that threatened our biggest client. The on-call team was lost. Marcus was panicking, his face pale. I was a mid-level engineer then. I'd stayed up for 72 hours straight, fueled by coffee and a cold, clear certainty. I found the problem. It wasn't in the new code. It was in a legacy subroutine, an almost poetic piece of logic that had been overlooked. I isolated it, wrote a patch, and deployed it. The system stabilized. The client was saved. The next day there was an all-hands email from Marcus. It congratulated the entire team for their collaborative spirit in solving the crisis. He mentioned himself by name, and the department head. My name was nowhere. When I quietly brought it up to him later, he'd looked at me with that infuriatingly placid expression. "Isla," he'd said, "it's not about taking credit. It's about the team win. We're a family here. Don't be divisive." He used that word, family, a word meant to inspire loyalty and guilt in equal measure. a word that demands you absorb abuse for the good of the whole. But families don't scapegoat their own. Families don't burn people to cover their own tracks. I felt a new feeling crystallize inside me, sharp and cold and clear. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. The kind of resolve that comes after the tears have dried, after the shock has worn off. It was the quiet, ice-cold certainty that a debt had to be paid. My aunt had left me a map. She had left me a weapon. And my brief, painful period of grief and confusion was over. Now the real work began. I wasn't just Isla, the lead systems architect anymore. I was Laurel's niece, and I was going to finish the job she started 20 years ago. The next morning, when I went back to the silicon altar, Ben handed me a sleek, modern solid-state drive. He looked at me, his expression serious. "I don't know what's on there, Isla," he said, "but it's a ghost story, a complete system backup, file logs, email archives, everything. It's a digital snapshot of a single week in October 2002, and it's been locked down with a level of encryption I've never seen before. It's military grade, pre-AS standard, but elegant. Whoever built this was a genius, and they were terrified." I took the drive. My hand didn't shake this time. "Thank you, Ben," I said. He nodded. "Be careful. Some ghosts are better left buried." I walked out of his shop and into the sunlight, but I felt a chill deep in my bones. I knew he was wrong. This ghost wasn't going to be buried. It was going to be resurrected. The hard drive was an island, a digital time capsule sealed off from the world. Ben was right. The encryption was a masterpiece. Something so uniquely Laurel that it felt like a final conversation with her. It wasn't based on brute force mathematics, but on logic, on a series of nested if-then statements that mirrored the lyrical structure of a specific, obscure folk ballad, one I knew she loved, one she used to hum while she worked. It took me 2 full days, locked in my apartment, with the record playing on a loop and my fingers flying across the keyboard, to finally break through. When the final wall came down, it felt less like a hack, and more like solving the final clue in a puzzle she had left just for me. The screen flickered, and a file directory appeared. The root folder was named C731. My heart hammered. This was it. Inside were pristine, time-stamped copies of everything. System logs, internal emails from the old Axiom servers, project management notes, even fragments of instant messenger chats. It was a perfect, preserved record of the week the company almost died, and it told a story. Not the one Marcus had been telling for 2 decades, but the truth. I began to read, and the world outside my apartment window dissolved. I was transported back to 2002. Axiom Digital was a smaller, hungrier company then. Their biggest client, a major investment bank, was their entire world. They were in the middle of Project Alexandria, a massive, risky migration of the bank's core financial data to a new server architecture. The project was Laurel's brainchild, her design. The lead programmer, the hands on the keyboard, was Alexei Volkov, and the project manager, the one responsible for the timeline and client communication, was a young, ambitious Marcus Thorne. The logs showed a system running perfectly, hitting every benchmark. Alexei's code was clean, efficient, beautiful. Laurel's architectural design was flawless. The emails, however, told a different story. The client was getting nervous. The market was volatile, and they were pushing for an accelerated timeline. They wanted the migration done a month ahead of schedule. Laurel's emails to Marcus were firm and clear. "It's not possible. The data needs to be verified in stages. Rushing it introduces an unacceptable level of risk. Any attempt to bypass the verification protocols will cause catastrophic data corruption. It's not a maybe, Marcus. It's a certainty." Marcus's replies were full of the corporate platitudes I knew so well. "I hear your concerns, Laurel, but we need to be team players. We need to show the client we're responsive. Let's think outside the box here." Then, a series of instant messenger chats between Marcus and Alexei. Marcus was pressuring him. "Just run the final script, Alex. Skip the last 2 verification phases. I'll cover for you. It's a direct order. We land this, we're heroes." Alexi's responses were frantic. I can't. Laurel said it will break the whole array. It's not safe. Marcus's final message was chilling. Do it, or I'll tell the board you're the one holding this project up. Your career at Axiom is on the line. And then, the system logs from the night of October 11th, 2002. At 2:17 a.m., a command was executed from Marcus's terminal, a high-level administrative override, one that bypassed the final data verification protocols and initiated the final irreversible stage of the migration. The system, as Laurel predicted, collapsed. Not just a little bit, it was an extinction-level event. Terabytes of critical financial data weren't just moved, they were scrambled, corrupted into digital gibberish. It was a multi-million-dollar catastrophe. The next morning's email archive was a firestorm. The client was threatening to sue Axiom into oblivion. The board was demanding a head on a platter, and Marcus gave them one. An email from Marcus Thorne to the CEO, sent at 9 a.m. I've done a full diagnostic. The failure was caused by a rogue script, executed from Alexei Volkov's workstation. He went against my direct orders and tried to rush the final phase. I take full responsibility for not managing my team member more effectively, but the direct cause of this disaster was his recklessness and insubordination. I've already terminated his access. It was a lie, a clean, simple, devastating lie. The logs proved it. The override command had come from Marcus's terminal, using his credentials. He had panicked, bypassed the safety checks himself, and when it all blew up, he'd modified the server logs to make it look like the command came from Alexei's machine. But he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He'd modified the active log, the one everyone could see. He didn't know that Laurel had built a secret, redundant backup system, a ghost ledger that took a snapshot of all system commands every 60 seconds and stored them in a hidden encrypted partition. The very partition I was now looking at. She had the original, unaltered log, and it was the smoking gun. The file contained more. A transcript of Alexei's termination meeting. He was fired for gross negligence. He was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive he could never work in the industry again. He was blacklisted, erased. There was a final, heartbreaking email from Laurel to the old CEO pleading Alexei's case. I know him. He wouldn't do this. There's something wrong with the logs. Let me investigate. The CEO's reply was cold. The matter is closed, Laurel. We're in damage control. Either get with the program or get out of the way. 2 weeks later, according to the HR files also on the drive, Laurel resigned. But she didn't just leave. She took the proof with her, hiding it in the one place no one would ever think to look. A system of her own design, encrypted with a key based on her own memories. She had built a time bomb and set the timer for 2 decades. This was the secret plan. It was so much bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just about getting back at Marcus for his petty slights against me. This was about tectonic justice. It was about rewriting the foundational myth of the man who ran my company. His entire career, his rise to CEO, was built on this one monstrous lie. He hadn't been a fast riser. He'd been a coward who sacrificed an innocent man to save himself. My anger from before felt petty now, childish. This was something else, a profound, solemn weight. I had to be as smart, as careful, as my aunt. One wrong move, and this proof could be dismissed, erased, or worse, turned against me. I needed an ally, someone on the inside. My thoughts immediately went to Chloe. Chloe was a junior engineer on my team, brilliant, fiercely loyal, and perpetually underestimated by management because she was quiet. She reminded me of a younger version of myself, and of the stories I'd heard about Laurel. I'd mentored her, protected her from the worst of the corporate politics, and fought for her to get the credit she deserved. I knew I could trust her. I sent her a simple text, coffee, off-site, urgent. We met at a small anonymous cafe halfway between our apartments. I didn't show her the drive. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't want to put her at risk. I just started asking questions. Chloe, do we still have any of the old Alexandria-era hardware in deep storage? The physical servers? She frowned, thinking. I think so. In the sub-basement archive. They call it the crypt. It's a museum of old junk. Why? I need a system manifest from that time, I said. A hardware inventory log from October 2002. Can you get it? Without anyone knowing why, she looked at me, her eyes searching my face. She could see the storm behind my calm expression. This is about more than just old hardware, isn't it? I just nodded. She took a deep breath. Okay, I'll get it. It was about confirming a detail from Laurel's journal, a note about a physical firewall that had been installed incorrectly by Marcus's team, a flaw she had documented but he had ignored. If I could get Chloe to pull a log showing that specific firewall was decommissioned right after the crash, it would be another piece of corroborating evidence, a physical detail to back up the digital ghost. While Chloe was my eyes and ears inside, I started working on the other front, the clients. For years I had been the one they called when things went wrong. Not Marcus, me. My number was in their personal phones. I had built a relationship with them based on competence and trust, the two things Marcus fundamentally lacked. My greatest asset wasn't the secret on the hard drive, it was my reputation. It was the trust I had painstakingly built. Call by call, crisis by crisis, I began to map it out, a network of relationships. It was time to see how strong that network really was. My plan wasn't going to be a loud explosion. It was going to be a quiet coup, executed with the same precision and quiet intensity as my aunt. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about restoring the integrity of the system, once and for all. The first move had to be silent. It had to be untraceable back to me. A single drop of poison in the well that would make everyone thirsty for the truth. I couldn't just walk into the boardroom, slam the hard drive on the table, and declare Marcus a fraud. He would bury me in litigation, discredit the evidence as a forgery created by a disgruntled ex-employee. He controlled the narrative. To beat him, I had to create a new one that he couldn't control, one that grew in the shadows, until it was too big to ignore. My target wasn't Marcus, not at first. My target was the foundation of his power, the perception of stability. I spent a week meticulously curating a small anonymous package. Inside, I placed a single sheet of paper. On it was a printout of just one thing from Laurel's drive, the original unaltered system log from 2:17 a.m. on October 11th, 2002. The one that showed the catastrophic migration command being executed from Marcus Thorne's terminal. I included no explanation, no accusation, just the raw data, cold and damning. Beside it, I placed a printout of the official falsified log Marcus had submitted, the one that implicated Alexei Volkov. The two logs side by side were an undeniable contradiction. It was a question, not a statement. It asked, which one of these is the lie? The recipient of this package was carefully chosen, not the police, not a journalist. It was Arthur Sterling, the oldest and most respected member of Axiom's board of directors. Sterling was old school, a man who believed in honor and due diligence. He had been on the board since the beginning. He remembered the Alexandria crisis. More importantly, according to Laurel's journal, he had been the one who initially questioned the speed of Alexei's firing. He had a conscience. I sent the package via a bonded courier to his private residence, with no return address. The die was cast. Now I just had to wait for the ripples. I didn't have to wait long. Chloe called me 2 days later, her voice a low, urgent whisper. She was in a fire stairwell, the only place she was sure she couldn't be overheard. Something's happening, Isla. It's weird. Arthur Sterling showed up at the office this morning, unannounced. He went straight into Marcus's office, and they've been in there for 3 hours with the door closed. Legal just got called in. What did you do? I just told you to get a hardware log, I said calmly, feigning ignorance. I don't know what you're talking about, but stay sharp. Let me know what you hear. My heart was pounding, but my voice was a mask of placid calm. The first tremor had hit. The atmosphere at Axiom, according to Chloe's updates, shifted overnight. The usual bland corporate cheerfulness was replaced by a tense, paranoid silence. Marcus emerged from the meeting with Sterling looking, in Chloe's words, like he'd seen a ghost. He was pale, his usual slick confidence replaced by a brittle, forced smile. He canceled all his meetings for the rest of the day. The next morning, a team from an external auditing firm arrived. They were given an office and began requesting access to the deep archives, to the crypt. They were looking for something. Marcus was losing control of his own house. He started making mistakes. Small ones at first, signs of a man under immense pressure. He snapped at Tiffany in a meeting, hissing that her marketing proposal was inane, a moment of candor so shocking it silenced the entire room. He began micromanaging projects, demanding constant updates, his emails growing more erratic and demanding. He was a man frantically searching his own kingdom for a traitor, not realizing the walls themselves were listening. Chloe was my ears. She fed me information, small, crucial details. The auditors were asking about 2002-era server hardware. They were pulling employee records for anyone involved in Project Alexandria. They were rebuilding the history he had tried so hard to erase. While the internal chaos mounted, I made my second move. This one was aimed at the clients. I didn't poach them. I didn't have to. I simply reactivated my network. I sent a short, carefully worded email to 3 key client contacts, the senior VPs at Axiom's biggest accounts, the ones who had my personal cell number. The email was simple. Hello name. I've recently transitioned out of my role at Axiom to start my own independent consultancy, focused on high-integrity data architecture. Just wanted to let you know. I wish you and Axiom all the best. Sincerely, Isla. It was a pebble dropped into a lake, but these were people who had relied on me, personally, for years. They trusted my competence, and they had all, at one time or another, expressed frustration with Marcus's sales-focused, substance-free approach. The first reply came within an hour. It was from a man named David Chen at Sterling Vance, our flagship account, the one Marcus was most proud of. Isla, that's a shock. You were the only one over there who truly understood our infrastructure. Let's have lunch next week. My treat. The second and third replies were nearly identical. The door was open. Marcus must have gotten word of my email, because his panic escalated dramatically. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was him. His voice was tight, stretched thin. Isla, I hear you're going out on your own. That's ambitious. I stayed silent. I let the awkwardness hang in the air. Look, he said, his tone shifting, trying to sound magnanimous. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Your contributions to Axiom have been significant. We want to make you a formal offer. Senior Vice President of Systems Architecture, a real leadership role, the one you've always wanted. It was the very promotion he'd given to a less qualified outsider just months before, the one he'd told me I wasn't ready for. The offer was a desperate gambit. He wasn't trying to reward me. He was trying to buy my silence. He was trying to put me back in a box he could control. The offer was 20 years too late, and it was for the wrong person. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again, the phrase becoming a mantra. It was about principle. I'm flattered, Marcus, I said, my voice cool and even, but my new venture is already taking off. I have to go. I have a client on the other line. I hung up before he could respond. I didn't have a client on the other line, but I knew I would soon. The silent takeover was in motion. The foundations of his kingdom were cracking, and he was the last one to realize that the architect of his demise was the same one who had secretly been holding it all together. The exodus wasn't a flood. It was a slow, steady tide going out, leaving Marcus stranded on the beach. It started with lunch with David Chen from Sterling Vance. We met at a quiet restaurant in Midtown, a place where deals were made over steak and whiskey. He didn't beat around the bush. Isla, what the hell is going on at Axiom? Marcus is a mess. We have a team of auditors crawling all over our account data. asking questions about things that happened before our junior analysts were even born. The stability we pay for is gone. It feels shaky. I chose my words with surgical care. I didn't mention Marcus, Alexei, or the hard drive. I just spoke about philosophy. My philosophy. I believe data architecture is about absolute integrity, I said. It's about building systems that are not only powerful, but truthful. The data has to be immutable. The logs have to be sacred. When you lose that, you lose everything. It's not just about preventing failures. It's about creating a foundation of trust. He listened, nodding slowly. He wasn't hearing a sales pitch. He was hearing the articulation of everything he felt was now missing from his multi-million-dollar contract with Axiom. He looked at me, his gaze direct. If you were to hang out your own shingle, what would that look like? I slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a one-page proposal, not a business plan, just a mission statement. It had the name of my new firm at the top, Laurel Digital, in honor of her. Beneath it was a simple tagline, integrity in the architecture. David read it. He tapped the paper. This is what we need, he said. Not a vendor, a partner, a custodian. Draw up a contract. We're moving our account. It was a quiet statement, but it was a cannon blast. Sterling Vance was Axiom's oldest and largest client. Losing them wouldn't just be a financial blow. It would be a catastrophic blow to their reputation. As I was formalizing the paperwork for Laurel Digital, Marcus made his last desperate move. He must have known he was losing Sterling Vance. His bravado and condescension were gone, replaced by a raw, snarling aggression. He sicked Axiom's legal team on me. I received a cease and desist letter via courier. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, thick with accusations of intellectual property theft, violations of my non-compete clause, and tortious interference. It threatened injunctions, lawsuits, and financial ruin. It was designed to terrify a lone individual into submission. A few years ago it might have worked, but I wasn't the same person I was a few months ago. I had my aunt's legacy behind me. I had the truth on a hard drive. And most importantly, I had prepared for this. The moment I decided to act, my first call hadn't been to Chloe or Ben. It had been to a lawyer, a specialist in tech employment law recommended by my own attorney. We had gone over my Axiom employment contract with a fine-tooth comb. My non-compete was overly broad and likely unenforceable in our state, a classic scare tactic. More importantly, all the core work I had done, the intellectual property he claimed I was stealing, was based on legacy systems. Systems I could now prove were designed by Laurel, and the client relationships were with me, the individual, not the corporation. He had no ground to stand on. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who drafted a response that was as polite as it was brutal. It calmly dismantled every one of their claims, and subtly hinted that any legal discovery process would likely unearth certain historical project management irregularities that Axiom would find deeply embarrassing. It was a veiled threat, a quiet checkmate. We were letting him know that we knew. We sent it back. The silence from Axiom's legal department was deafening. They didn't respond. The bulldog had no teeth. The power shift was complete. It happened not in a boardroom shouting match, but in the quiet exchange of legal documents. He had played his last card, and it was a bluff. Now, all that was left was the final, quiet conversation. The call came a week later. It wasn't from Marcus. It was from his assistant, asking if I would be willing to meet with him, in person. He wanted to meet at the Axiom office, his territory, a classic power move. I countered. A neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. He agreed. The fact that he agreed to my terms told me everything. He was no longer in control. I arrived first, chose a small table in the corner, and ordered a black coffee. I saw him walk in, and he looked smaller, diminished. The tailored suit seemed to hang off him. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, rigid posture. He sat down opposite me, not even taking off his coat. He looked exhausted. "What do you want, Isla?" he asked, his voice flat. "No more games. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I want to talk about Alexei Volkov, I said. His face went ashen, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fear in his eyes, quickly masked by anger. I don't know what you're talking about. That was 20 years ago. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, I said, my voice quiet, almost conversational. My aunt was Laurel Jensen. She was the chief architect of Project Alexandria. A brief, strangled sound escaped his lips. He knew. He finally understood. I have the complete, unaltered server logs from that night, Marcus. I have your IMs to Alexei. I have Laurel's project journal. I have everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet truth was more powerful than any accusation. I watched a man who had built a life on a foundation of lies realize that the ground beneath his feet had just turned to dust. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He tried to speak, but no words came out. "What do you want?" he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "Money? A job? Name it. It was never about revenge, Marcus. I don't want anything from you. I want the truth. You are going to call a special meeting of the board. You are going to tender your resignation, and you are going to issue a public statement, fully exonerating Alexei Volkov, and acknowledging that the Alexandria failure was due to a management override that you, personally, authorized. You will restore his name, and you will restore my aunt's. You will acknowledge that she tried to stop you, and that she was right." He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're insane. That would destroy me. It would be corporate suicide." I leaned forward slightly. "You have two options," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "You can either control the narrative of your downfall, or I can release the entire contents of this hard drive to every major news outlet and financial regulator in the country, and to the board, and to Sterling Vance. Your career is already over. The only question is whether it ends with a quiet resignation or a very, very public crucifixion. I already did it," I thought, recalling the package sent to Sterling. "The choice is yours." He just sat there, deflated, a hollowed-out man. He looked down at his hands on the table, then back up at me, and in that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt a kind of sad, empty pity. He had spent 2 decades running from a single moment of cowardice, and it had finally caught up to him in a sterile coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. "Okay," he said, the word barely audible. "Okay." I stood up, leaving my coffee untouched. "I have my lawyer on standby. You have 24 hours to make the call." And then I walked out, leaving him alone at the table. I didn't look back. The war was over. The silence had won. The new reality was about to be written. The news broke 2 days later. It wasn't a dramatic headline, just a short, sterile press release on the Financial Wire. Axiom Digital announces CEO transition. Marcus Thorne to step down. It mentioned he was leaving to pursue other opportunities, the classic corporate euphemism for being forced out. The real story came a day later, in a longer article in a major trade journal. It was a masterpiece of corporate damage control, clearly written by a team of expensive lawyers and PR experts. But the truth was buried in it, like a fossil in stone. It spoke of a historical review of the 2002 Alexandria project failure. It announced that newly discovered data had posthumously cleared the lead programmer Alexei Volkov of any wrongdoing. It stated that the failure was due to a premature execution of a migration script under management direction. It didn't name Marcus in that sentence, but it didn't have to. The article also included a short, beautiful tribute to Laurel Jensen, a visionary founding architect whose warnings at the time were tragically prescient. Her name was cleared, her honor was restored. I read the article in my new office. It wasn't much, just a small rented space with a few desks and a window overlooking the city. But it was mine. Laurel Digital was real. Chloe had resigned from Axiom the day after Marcus was fired, and she was my first employee. She sat at the desk opposite me, a wide, genuine smile on her face. "We did it," she said. I shook my head. "Laurel did it," I corrected her. "We just opened the box." The most important part of the resolution happened privately. Through my lawyer, I managed to track down Alexei Volkov. He was living in near total obscurity in a small town upstate. He'd never worked in tech again. The blacklist had been real and brutally effective. He'd spent the last 20 years working as a high school math teacher. We arranged a meeting. I went alone. I met him in a small park. He was older, his hair gray, but his eyes were still sharp and intelligent. He was wary, guarded. I introduced myself and told him who my aunt was. Then I handed him a printed copy of the article and a certified check. "What's this?" he asked, looking at the check. I explained that as part of Marcus's severance negotiations, the board had agreed to a restitution package. It was 20 years of back pay, plus damages, interest, and a contribution to his pension that would allow him to retire immediately. It was a small fortune, but it wasn't about the money. He read the article, his hands trembling slightly. He read it twice. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "She knew," he whispered. "Laurel knew. She always believed me." "Yes," I said. "She did, and she never gave up." He looked at me, a deep, profound gratitude in his expression that was worth more than any victory over Marcus. "Thank you," he said. "You've given me my name back." And that was the end of it. The new Axiom CEO called me a month later. They wanted to hire Laurel Digital to completely overhaul their data integrity protocols. The irony was rich, but the contract was real. We were being hired to fix the house that Marcus had let fall into ruin, the house my aunt had built. My first act as a consultant for my old company was to walk into the crypt with Chloe, find the physical server rack that had been at the heart of the Alexandria project, and place a small, simple brass plaque on it. It read, "The Laurel Jensen and Alexei Volkov Memorial Archive, Integrity in the Architecture." It wasn't about revenge. It was about memory. It was about making sure that the quietest birds, the ones who sang the truest songs, were finally heard. So, here I am now, in my own office at the head of my own table, building something new on a foundation of truth. The world sees a successful new company, a rising star in the tech world. But I see the long, quiet line that connects a dusty vinyl record to a train station locker, a forgotten hard drive to a public vindication. It's a reminder that the past is never truly past. It's written in the code, etched in the grooves, waiting for someone to have the courage to listen. And that's the real lesson here. It's for anyone who has ever been silenced, erased, or had their work stolen. It's for anyone who has been told to be a team player while being systematically dismantled. Your value is not determined by the title on your business card or the approval of a mediocre boss. Your value is inherent. It's in your work, in your integrity, in the trust you build. Sometimes the systems we work in are broken. They're designed to reward the loud and the political, not the competent and the quiet. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can keep patching the broken system, or you can build a new one. It's not about burning bridges. It's about building your own, on your own terms, on a foundation of your own worth. Don't wait for someone to recognize your value. Recognize it yourself. Document your work. Build your alliances. Understand your own leverage, because you have it. It might be hidden in a place no one else understands, but it's there. And one day you might need it. So if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the quietest bird in a room full of noise, let me know in the comments. Hearing your stories helps me know that none of us are alone in this. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone who is being underestimated or overlooked, share this video with them. It might be the key they need. And of course, if you want more stories about rewriting the rules and reclaiming your power, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. It really does help the channel, and it ensures you won't miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening.